In this video, we're going to talk about class properties and also access modifiers. Alright, so what we have here is the user class that we created in the last lecture, and if you didn't check that out, just go ahead and take a look at this and copy it, do what you need to do. What we have is a class called user. We have a constructor which just has some commented out code. We have register, login, auth user, and our destructor, okay, which is commented out. Now login is calling this and then auth user, so it's calling this method right here. Alright, so before we get into access modifiers, let's just add a couple properties in here. Alright, so properties can also have access modifiers, which will usually be set to public. Alright, and if you don't put anything here, if you don't put public or private or protected, it's going to be looked at as public. Alright, so let's say let's see, an ID. Okay, how about a username? Maybe an email, and of course a password. Okay, so there's our properties. These are also sometimes called attributes. Now there may be times when you're looking at PHP code and you don't see the public or private, you see var. Alright, now when you see that, that's usually because it's using PHP 4. Alright, because the access modifiers were new in PHP 5. Alright, so before that you would see var. So that's what that is if you see that, which is basically the same thing as public. And another thing I should mention is that you can actually set default values here. Okay, so if we wanted to set the ID to 1, we could do that. In this situation, there's not really anything here that we would want to set a default for, because every user is different. But just so you know, you could do that. Now, just like we did with calling a method from our class using this, we can use this to get properties as well. So actually, if I say ID equals 33, and what are we calling? We're calling the auth function here. So let's just try it out and say echo this ID. Okay, if we reload that, we get 33. Okay, so we can access properties in all of our methods. Let me just put that back. All right. Now, what you usually want to do is when we're passing in stuff to a method in our object, we want to set it. All right, so set it to our properties. So for instance, when we get this login, we're passing in some kind of username and password. And what we could do here is we could say this username, okay, which is going to be this right here. That's where it's coming from. We're going to set that to username. Alright, and then we can do the same with password. Okay, so that'll equal whatever password is passed in here. Alright, and then what we can do is just get rid of that. And down here, instead of passing that in, let's say echo this username. Alright, and then we'll still run the same thing as we did down here, and we still get Brad is authenticated, yet we didn't have to pass anything into auth user because we know that the user information is being stored in the class property. Alright, if we change that to password, it's going to give us the password. Alright. Now another thing you might want to do is pass these into the constructor when you actually initialize or instantiate the user object. Alright, so I don't think I showed you this in the last video, but you can actually have parameters in your constructor. Alright, so let's take this username and password, take it out of there and put it right in there. Alright, and then this, where we're setting our properties, I'm going to take that out and I'm going to put that in the constructor. Okay, so now what we need to do is where we initialized it, that's where we want to pass in the user info. Alright, I'm not saying this is what you should always do, but just to show you that it's possible. Alright, and then we can just call login as is. Alright, so let's reload. Okay, so that didn't work. Username, this username equals username. I removed the this here. That's what's going on. So this username. There we go. All right. So that's basically how properties work. All right. Now let's take a look at access modifiers. So public, we have private, and we also have protected. All right. So public means we can just access them whenever or wherever. All right, so for instance, let's go down here and let's see. We know we're setting the property for username and password when we do this. So now let's see if we can echo out username. All right, and I'm going to comment out that. All right, now if we go and reload, you can see we're getting Brad. Okay, because we're instantiating the user here. We know that the username is going to be Brad, and now we can access it even outside of the class. All right, now what if I was to change this username right here to private? All right, and a lot of times people will keep their properties private and then just have the methods public. All right, which is a good idea because a lot of the times you're not going to need people to access these values from outside. All right, so if we go and we try to do that, we get a fatal error that says cannot access private property. Okay, if we change it to, let's say, protected and save it, again, we're getting a fatal error. Okay. But if we were to extend the user class to something else, then we'd be able to use username in that class. All right, and we'll get into inheritance later on. For now, let's just put this back to private. And then down here, we want to just get rid of that. All right, so that's going to be it as far as properties and access modifiers. Obviously, we'll get into more later on. But that's going to be it for this video, and I will see you in the next one.